if it was valued in your organization. If you don't think it's valued, you're probably not going to do it. So it's the values, attitudes, and beliefs that are driving the behaviors, not the training program. The training program is trying to instill in you different values, perhaps different beliefs. So when we put the values, attitudes, and beliefs in the middle of managerial activities and behaviors, we start to see a whole bunch of other things managers can do. For example, in one organization we studied, the CEO, not the cybersecurity person, but the CEO starts every all hands meeting with a cybersecurity story. Somebody talks about the latest headline, or he talks about something personal that he saw, a phishing email he got, or he has the cybersecurity team give a little talk on a story, tell a story about some other cybersecurity incident going on. When there was the breach of Equifax, that was the topic that he brought up in his all hands meeting because it affected every single person in the organization. Well, when the CEO brings up something, it has a different impact than when your cybersecurity leader brings it up. So there's an example of a managerial mechanism to change the values, attitudes, and beliefs. The CEO talking about cybersecurity trickles down to his or her team, feeling that cybersecurity is important, which trickles down to their teams about how important cybersecurity is. And all of a sudden, you're driving the values of cybersecurity being important in an organization. So our research has taken a couple of different avenues. We have a model, which is available on our website if anybody's interested, of what I've just described, managerial mechanisms that lead to changes in behavior, changes in values, attitudes, and beliefs, which lead to changes in behavior. We also have used this framework and looked at how do you drive secure products and services. If we believe that secure product design is a behavior we want to drive, then this model should apply. We have to instill the values, attitudes, and beliefs into our design people. And we looked at that in 3 multinational corporations that do software design. And we saw that we saw the ways that they are describing or not describing the values, attitudes, and beliefs for building secure products and services. We've looked at this through individuals and organizations. We've looked at it in different countries. We have some international studies on this, and we're validating this model over and over, that it's not about training driving behaviors. It's about training, driving, and many other managerial mechanisms driving values, attitudes, and beliefs, culture, which drives cybersecure behaviors. So let me stop there and see if you have any, want to ask me more about that project, Alan.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I would just say from a personal note, I have really appreciated over the past few years that you guys have been participating in this symposium, how you drive this message of how cybersecurity is not just a technical problem, but it's also a people problem. And you've come at that from a number of different ways. I think the values, attitudes, and beliefs is a mantra that I've just learned and memorized and internalized as I've gotten to know you and CAMS. I just want to pause for a second and thank Sridhar for reminding me to turn the record button on. So for those of you who don't know, this session is being recorded, at least except for the very, very beginning, which I missed. And I'll have to get better at that as we do the Inside MIT series. Keri, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit and just ask you to speak a little bit about cyber resilience. And the thing is that cyber resilience has emerged as part of the core theme for the 2023 Symposium. So, not to go into a lot of detail because you're going to have a whole panel to talk about it, but I know that you have a recent article in the Sloan Management Review, and maybe just let everybody know what you mean by cyber resilience.
Sure. So switching gears from culture to cyber resilience, we believe that today you can't be 100% secure. You can't invest your way into enough protections to be 100% secure. The bad guys, we like to say, Stuart likes to say, the bad guys are getting badder faster than the good guys are getting better. They only have to find one crack in our armor, and we have to armor up every little angle of our company, which is turning out to be even more of a challenge than anybody ever thought it would be. I think that's why cyber risk is so high on everybody's agenda, including boards of directors agenda these days, is that the risk is so high that we've left a window cracked that we can't be secure enough. So our team was thinking about this, and we thought really the issue here isn't about protecting our organizations, it's about being resilient. In other words, being able to absorb and respond and recover from a cyber incident. And instead of spending, there's a protection component of that. You want to be as protected as you can. But instead of trying to spend more money and more time and more attention on protection, let's spend time, money, and energy on resilience. How can we make sure that if or when, depending on your belief, you experience a cyber incident, that you've built the mechanisms in your organization to absorb that, to respond to that, and to recover from that. For example, and we did just publish an article in Sloan. I'm delighted to say it was my first article of 2023, came out already in January. We did this with one of our research partners, Stuart and I, and a couple of our research partners. So we defined this principle, if you will, in 4 steps. So every organization is anticipating some sort of cyber incident. And most companies prepare for that by investing more and more in protection. We want to detect it. We want to know if we've built our firewalls high enough, if we've filtered out any potential suspect emails or code that comes in, that we're running bots through our systems to make sure that all the technologies are working well. But we know that, as I said, the bad guys are getting through our protections. So eventually there's a shock, there's an incident, a cyber incident. And then the question becomes, how does your company absorb that shock? And some companies, they aren't prepared, particularly small and medium businesses we find particularly vulnerable here. They're just not prepared. They put all the protections in place, but if you penetrate the protections, they don't really know what the next step is, these companies that are not prepared. Many companies are very prepared. They've done things like tabletop exercises and fire drills so that they know what they're going to do. They've put in protections for mitigating risk. They may have insurance. They may have redundant systems. They may have diversified their risk portfolio so that if something's compromised, they have another way around what they need so they can continue with business as usual. But eventually, every organization responds, and some organizations, the resilient ones, respond quicker and better, and they're back up to normal or maybe even better operating levels quicker because they focused on resilience, not just on being cyber secure and protected. Now, I realize I'm splitting hairs. This is just maybe a difference in language for the way some people think about it. But we believe that by talking about cyber resilience, we're setting organizations up for what they really want, which is to continue business in the event of a cyber incident. So this article sort of outlines this process of anticipate, absorb, respond, and then reshape your organization. And with lots of stories about how organizations are doing this. But the implications of focusing on resilience go far beyond just investing in your cybersecurity strategy. Many organizations have a strategy. You might be using something called the NIST model. The National Institute of Standards and Technology has a model which has 5 layers: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Many people focus on the first 3. What are the crown jewels? How do we protect it? How do we detect if there's an incident? And what we're suggesting is spending equal or more time on the response and recover. So you've got your recovery in place. Another company that was particularly cyber resilient, this is a kind of a funny story. They had a business continuity plan, but where do you think they stored their continuity plan? Well, it was on their computer, and their computers were hacked and the systems were down and everything was locked up, and they didn't have access to their continuity plans because they'd never evaluated their continuity plans in the context of a cyber breach. And so when the plans were locked up, they didn't know where to go. They didn't have their plan. They couldn't access it. But one enterprising administrative person had printed it out and stuck it in a file cabinet. And so when she got wind that they were looking for their resiliency plan, she goes to the cabinet. She says, "Is this what you're looking for?" You can't see it, but I'm waving some paper. And she became ground zero for their recovery because she happened to have printed it out. Now, a resilient organization would have anticipated this. They would have done maybe some fire drills with their systems locked up. They would have realized that having their business continuity plan on a computer alone was probably not the best idea, and they would have made plans. They would have been more resilient. They would have been able to get back up to speed faster. So really, that's kind of what we're examining. This is a very current project. I have a number of different offshoots of this project going on right now. But the idea here is protection is important, but it's not enough today. It's not enough. You have to be resilient. And to be resilient means you have to think about not only how do you protect, but how are you going to respond and recover and get back up to operating levels or higher quicker.
So, Keri, I don't know if I've told you this before, but you remind me of a woman who won the Iditarod up in Alaska 3 times in a row. And someone asked her, what was your secret to success? And she says, well, most of the racers, they train and they prepare. But the thing is, they all plan for everything to go right because they're so well prepared. What I do is I plan for everything to go wrong. And when it does, I get up and I get back on the sled and I keep on going. And she won 3 times in a row. And that's kind of the core message that I hear coming from you. So you are kind of the cybersecurity Iditarod winner.
All right, I'm going to take that title.
Yeah.
We're not unique in the idea of resilience. That we've been talking about cyber resilience since the day we talked about cyber attacks. What's different here is that most people do exactly what you said. They respond, they try to build in all these protections so the bad guys can't get in. We're saying you have to now, today, from 2023 forward, you have to assume the bad guys are going to get in. We can't protect our way out of it. I'm not saying don't invest in those things. Your racer is training and is preparing for everything to go right, but she's also thinking about what she's going to do in the event of something going wrong. And you're exactly right. That's what we're saying here. Think about how would you be resilient? What do you need to put in place? What muscles do you need to get in shape, i.e. your response muscles, so that you can get back up to operating levels as quickly as possible.
All right, let's touch upon one more thing that I know that you talk about a lot, you write about a lot, and let's put it in front of the audience, and that is the role of the board of directors with respect to cybersecurity oversight and management. So what insights have you learned in this area?
Yeah, this is my favorite area right now of my research. In fact, I'm on one board and I'd love to join a second board. If anyone here is looking for board members, reach out. Love to talk to you about that. I think the board's role in cybersecurity is, of course, changing in part because of the new SEC ruling, and I'm sure many of you have been reading or hearing about it in the headlines. The SEC is requiring publicly traded companies to have a way to do a number of things, one of which is have expertise on your board about cybersecurity, and how you're going to execute that is perhaps unique for your organization, but a lot of companies are struggling with that. But what we've learned is in this research area is that, of course, boards have fiduciary and oversight responsibility. And boards have in their role as risk managers and oversight, they're often presented with presentations from their technology people, their CIO, perhaps their CISO. And those presentations usually center around protection. Here's all the money we've invested. Here's what we think the risk is now that we've protected ourselves. Here's the number of people that failed our last phishing exercise, and here's what we're doing to lower that percentage so that people don't click on emails. It's very seductive. All the technology numbers are very seductive. What percent of our endpoints are protected? How often are we surveying our endpoints? But that's not telling the board what they need to know. The board's focus can't be on the technology. That's the operating manager's focus. The board has to perform oversight and make sure that the management is doing what seems to be the most reasonable and right thing. So in my role, my research, we are looking at a couple angles here. One is, what are the right questions for the board to ask? And to that end, we published an article last January 2020 on the 7 questions the board should ask at their next board meeting. At that time, my mind was around this NIST model that I just mentioned, where we look at the crown jewels and we look at how we're protecting and detecting and responding and recovering. And the 7 questions come directly from that NIST model. That article got a lot of play. People, CISOs, technology people needed something to show to their boards about, look, here's what you need to talk about. Here's what you need to ask me. And then they had reasonable and fruitful discussions. But since I've just talked to you about our resilience project, that actually has changed my opinion on what the questions are that the board needs to ask. I think the board does need to ask about protection and detection, but I think the board needs to ask questions like, what's our biggest technology risk and what are we doing about it? What happens if that happens? How are we planning to respond? How resilient are we? I think the board needs to focus on resilience. And now I think they're asking the wrong questions. So instead of saying how many people failed a phishing exercise or how are we improving that number, I think the board needs to say, what's our organizational risk? You know, where do we think the risk is coming from and what are we doing about it? It might be phishing exercises or it might be something else. But by just talking about phishing exercises, we're ignoring whatever other human risk might be coming into our systems. So, so the board's questions, and I just submitted an article on this one, so hopefully it'll get published someplace soon. But we're looking at what I'm calling the balanced scorecard, which looks at financial, organizational, technology, and supply chain. Borrowing from my Harvard colleagues from many years ago, where they built a financial balance scorecard. We're looking at this as a cyber balance scorecard, and we're saying that we need to look at the risk in those 4 areas, and then overall cyber resilience. And we need to, as a board, to know how resilient are we? How quickly can we get back up to speed? That is really what oversight is all about. It's not about how protected are we, but how fast can we get our business back up to speed should something happen? And those are the questions I think the boards need to be asking.
Okay, so we're going to open it up to audience questions shortly, but before we do, let's just go through a couple of things that I want to make sure that everyone knows about CAMS. And so first of all, can you tell us, how can companies get involved with CAMS?
Oh, great. I love the commercial part. So thank you for asking me that. So CAMS is a research consortium, which means that our funding for all the projects I've just mentioned and dozens more come directly from companies like yours who join CAMS as a member. So the most helpful to us is for organizations to join CAMS either as a member or partner, and our website outlines all the benefits of those different levels. But we have a couple of other on-ramps. One on-ramp is what we call our Friday research community meetings. It's sort of like this. We have a speaker each week. Irving is on the call here, and he's been at many of those. I think you've even spoken at some of them, Irving, if I'm not mistaken. We have somebody who has a topic that's of interest to our community. Again, we're managerial, leadership, strategy, compliance, regulation, new innovation, management. We're the management side of cyber. So we have somebody talking about the topic, and then anybody can join us. And if you're interested in that, send an email to me. My email, Alan can make it available to you, or you can find me on the MIT website, but it's kerip@mit.edu, K-E-R-I, Keri P. And I will add you to our email list. And then if you see a topic on a Friday that looks of interest, just join us. We only have a couple rules. One is you have to register with your full name and your affiliation, so we know who's on the call. And the second rule is what we call Chatham House rule. I'm sure many of you know that. You take the ideas from the meeting, but don't take anybody's name. Don't attribute it. Don't quote. Don't say that, Google is doing X or State Street is doing Y. Don't take the company name or the people's name. Just take the ideas and implement them in your organization. Really, it's about opening up to the community so that we can share our research and hear what's going on, and and really raise all boats. So that's an easy on-ramp for individuals or for companies that are nonprofit or don't have the budget to join us. We'd love to have you participate in CAMS. And then the third way is through our events. We have one event a year that's open to the MIT community. All of you are part of that. You can do that through, it's called the CCIS, the CAMS Cybersecurity Innovation Symposium. It's limited, we only have 150 seats, but it is open to our community, and we will be talking about in person, so not on Zoom, not virtual, cybersecurity today and tomorrow. So what is cybersecurity going to look like in the relatively short term, 3 to 5 years from now? And what are we doing to be prepared? We have to block and tackle today. We have to know what our protections are, what our resilience is. We have to do all that today, or we won't be here tomorrow. But let's just take one day out of our really busy schedules and in protecting ourselves and talk about tomorrow, because any of the technologies, the policies, the organizational ideas, any of those things that we're going to have 3 to 5 years from now are already on the in the labs and being designed today. So let's just take a day out, bring some of the best, the brightest minds from around all of MIT and frankly all around the world, and come talk about it. Last year was our inaugural session. We did it with some Sloan students, helped us organize it. We had people from the White House. We had thought leaders. Dmitry Pavlovich from CrowdStrike was one of our keynotes. Stephen Boyer from BitSite was another keynote. It was really a one-day, very intimate, intense discussion about what does it look like in the future and what's our roadmap to get there. So if that's of interest, we're just kicking that off in the next few weeks. You can register for that. It's a slight fee, but reasonable for a one-day session. And I think everybody last time left with some insights about things that they can start today so that they're prepared for cyber in the future. So that's 3 different things. Join CAMS, join our CCIS, or come to our Friday meetings.
Yeah, so with that in mind, I put your website and your email in the chat so that people can find it pretty easily. I just want to say that I do attend your Friday meetings. I try to come whenever I'm able to, and they are really super informative. So I would highly recommend that, as well as the CAMS meeting you had last year was extremely informative. And so those are all great ways to get involved. Okay, well, and also don't forget that Keri will be at the symposium in May. So you'll have another chance to hear her talk, as well as Stu Madical giving the opening keynote. So with that, let's open it up to audience questions. Again, if you go down to reactions and raise your hand, we can recognize you and ask Keri some more details about CAMS. So who has a question? Irving, you have to unmute.
So, Keri, I've gotten quite involved in a new initiative of the Linux Foundation called the Open Wallet Foundation to create universal digital wallets. And while there are multiple motivations, in my opinion, the most important one is digital identities and a way of certifying who we are, what we are, etc., and attestations and things like that, so that we don't have to keep using emails and passwords and figuring out who came to us. What do you think of sort of digital identities as a way of increasing resilience, so it becomes safer to figure out who is who and what is what and so on. I don't know if my question was clear enough, but feel free to interpret it and articulate the way I should have asked it.
Well, digital identities, thanks, Irving, for asking that. Digital identities certainly hold a lot of promise. And I'm excited to know you're working on the digital wallet. I know a lot about the projects you're on, but not too much about that particular one. So thanks for sharing that. When you say increase resilience, how is the Digital Wallet Foundation seeing that as a way to increase resilience? Are they talking about resilience at all?
Well, they're talking about it in the sense that today we use emails and passwords to identify ourselves to the applications and websites that we want to go after. And the problem is that emails and passwords are so easy to hack. First of all, if you said, well, we should all be using totally random passwords, yeah, but then we don't remember them. So we tend to stick to the same passwords. And if we had a digital identity based on private public keys that are kept in these devices or in some hardware secure element that you can attach to your laptops and so on, that would create a much safer way of telling whoever you want to access who you are and getting from them the response that the two sides can get together. So that is the objective. And the reason a wallet comes in is that this is so complicated that nobody uses them. There are identities out there, but it's just complicated. Remember, private, public keys and stuff like that. So it all has to be, quote unquote, automated in a wallet. That's the thought. We'll see, but it's a real problem. And that's why one of the biggest problems with security is phishing. We get an email, and before you know it, we clicked on the link, or we get a text and we clicked on the link, or we replied, and it's off to the races then. So that's the thinking here.
Yeah, so I think the goal is noble. Finding better ways for identity and identity management and access management is certainly a high priority in cybersecurity. I haven't done any deep research on this area, so I'm kind of giving you just my thoughts off the top of my head. And I see two prongs, both sides. On the one hand, it'd be nice if our identity, our passwords and whatever we're using could be secure, and encryption is certainly one way to do it. We've seen a lot of work in the biometric space, eyeballs or fingers or whatever, whatever biometric component you want to use. We've seen blockchain being used in some way to store, maybe not encrypted, but to store information so that it's more secure in various ways. And I think there's a lot of work going on in identity and access management, as I said. So I think a digital wallet is a great idea, and it's another avenue, and it would be a way to more clearly protect our, let's just call it password, access code, whatever it is for right now. But on the other hand, once we put something digital online like that, it also will open up new opportunities for hacking. And typically when we start with something new like that, we have vulnerabilities we hadn't thought of. The bad guys are very clever and have will probably think of ways to hack it in ways we didn't even think about in the first place. And so we end up with a false sense of security, at least until we get over that hump. And in the meantime, we're, I believe, less resilient because we think we're secure. And so we're not looking for the kinds of breaches that would in fact be happening. So it's a mixed bag in the short term. I think in the long term, it holds a lot of promise. And I'm applauding your work with that because they need the brightest minds, and to have someone like you on the team is awesome. I think that's excellent.
Hey, Keri, we have a couple of questions that come in via chat, so
Sure.
I'm going to do those. I just want to remind people that, you'll notice I have my hand up. If you go down to reactions, you can raise your hand, and it makes it easier for us to find you in order to unmute you. But anyway, the first question comes in from Professor David Punwa. He says, with global recession in mind, what are some of the corporate governance cybersecurity risks which we should be aware of from Africa?
Okay, so corporate performance cybersecurity, corporate governance cybersecurity risks. Okay, so well, first of all, Professor, thank you for joining us, and I'm delighted to see people from outside the U.S. participating in our often US-centric MIT activities. So thank you for being here. I think that from a corporate governance perspective, we are most at risk of what we miss. It's not what we're doing, it's what we don't know that we should be doing that we're not doing. And that's why I think with corporate governance, cybersecurity risk, the question isn't how many people failed a phishing exercise and what's our identity access management program look like, but asking our technology people the more broader question of what risk are we facing? What do you think to our CISO or to our CIO, what's the biggest risk you see for us? And how are we managing it? What is the biggest financial risk? What is the biggest supply chain risk? All of those have huge amounts of cybersecurity risk that need to be managed, regardless of what country that you're in. Now, unfortunately, I'm not up on Africa per se, so I can't speak to the any unique risks that come out of being part of the African community. But in general, I mean, I did attend the World Economic Forum meeting in the fall on cybersecurity, and that's very global. I do think there's some global risks of things like, as we've already talked about, resilience. How resilient are our companies, and interdependencies as our supply chains start to become the vector of attack for companies. We need to make sure our suppliers are as secure as necessary. Many companies are trying to do that by blocking suppliers that aren't secure. In other words, they would give you a questionnaire, or they would want to do some penetration testing of your systems to see how secure you are before they let you be their supplier. Well, I'm not sure that's the best approach, especially for a lot of companies that don't have the resources to be at the top of the security chain, much less respond. You give a small business, a small or medium business, a 60-page questionnaire, you're pretty much saying to them either lie because they don't know the answer to this stuff, or you're saying to them, we don't want you to be a supplier. So I think we need new mechanisms to help our supply chain be more secure. So the customer reaching back down the supply chain and helping the suppliers help them. We saw this in the Walmart world when we went to electronic data interchange. We saw Walmart reaching back to their suppliers and not just saying, get on this system or don't do business with us, but get on this system and let us help you so that we can make everybody's work a little bit easier. We can have electronic data interchange. We can have electronic ordering. I see the same vision, if you will, for cybersecurity. We need the big guys to reach back to the smaller guys and to their supply chain, regardless of what country they're from, and help them be more resilient. So I'm not sure I've answered your question, so please ask us a follow-on question. But to me, I think thinking about what is the biggest risk and how are we managing it from inside your company, and then looking at your supply chain and seeing how you can help your suppliers help you be more secure.
All right, and then Sridhar has asked to be recognized, so I'm unmuting or asking him to unmute. And why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Keri. Thanks a lot for organizing this session. My question is related to the cloud infrastructure. So, Keri, what is your thoughts and what is your advice companies that are migrating their infrastructure to public cloud in terms of securing their public cloud infrastructure and the network?
Yep, cloud is a very important topic in cybersecurity these days. Many companies migrate to the cloud thinking that that's more secure. And let me tell you right now, it is not more secure. The actual infrastructure might be more secure. The technology, the data center stuff that you're using from the cloud is going to be more secure. But your data and if you've put your own applications up there, they are not more secure. It's still up to you to manage them. And the more cloud applications you have, perhaps the more complex your cybersecurity program will need to be. For example, if you're in Azure and you're in Google and you're in Amazon, you're in all these different clouds, there's different control processes in each one. And you've got to know those control processes in each one to make sure that your data and perhaps your application is secure. So I'm not a big fan of the cloud for security reasons. I am a big fan of the cloud for infrastructure reasons. If you are a small or medium business, if you want to not have to reinvent the software and you want to use SAP or Oracle or whatever your application is, sure, that's awesome. Use the cloud, but don't think that you're offloading the security issues. You need to be just as secure. You need to audit and make sure you know where the security risks are and that you personally or your company manages that data and those risks. So you still need to make sure your data is backed up. Maybe your cloud provider is doing that, but you don't know. It's not a given. You got to check on that. Maybe your access is protected. You don't know. You got to check on that. So I think the cloud is great for infrastructure and for helping companies not have to invest in traditional data centers. I think in terms of security, it's still a little bit more Wild West than we'd like it to be.
All right, so next up is Kevin. I'm going to unmute him so that he can ask his question.
Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be. Thanks for hosting this. So I attended a conference this past September hosted by MIT and the Federal Reserve, focused on measuring cybersecurity in the financial services sector. Various groups from MIT attended Sloan, the computer science division, the policy research initiative. My first question, hopefully an easy one, is CAMS tied into this initiative? And then I'll ask my deeper question.
So I'm not familiar with the group, with the thing that you attended. It's possible that Professor Madnick was drawn into that. I don't know. I don't have insight into that. We have worked with the Federal Reserve in the past, and we talk with people at the Federal Reserve about our research. But that particular program that you're talking about, I don't know that we're involved with that. We probably should be. We do have a number of financial services companies that are members of CAMS.
Okay, I did paste the link just so you can see who from MIT attended. But my real question was, one of the key challenges that was discussed was that of information sharing. So information related to how companies are identifying threats in planning to protect are readily available and very transparent. However, when it comes to sharing information specific to breaches, it is very difficult to share information, right? There are some forums specific to financial services where, FS-ISAC, if you're familiar with that, but mostly it's through personal networks. And so the question, and typically it's a legal issue, especially if you're a publicly traded company. the lawyers get involved in sort of shut down any information sharing. So my question is CAMS focused on that challenge at all?
Yes, we've done a lot of work with ISACs. Ironically, the FS ISAC was the first one we started with a number of years ago before the pandemic hit. We've looked at information sharing. We've looked at the barriers to information sharing. There are organizational barriers. As you said, there's legal barriers usually. And I've also worked with, and I'm forgetting the name of the organization right now, but we actually have a speaker coming up on our Friday series who's going to talk about the future of ISACs and what the ISACs are information sharing groups in multiple different industries. And there's an organization that organizes ISACs. So they're going to come in and talk about the future. I think information sharing is really important and really fraught with fear. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. What we've seen with information sharing is if it's punitive, you share information and then you come back and have some sort of punitive damages, or you're sued, or you make headlines, your reputation is damaged, nobody's going to share. On the other hand, nobody wants to do business with a financial services company that isn't safe. So we really haven't cracked the nut in how do you share information and still protect all of the concerns that different organizations have. We're making great strides. I know the FS ISAC was started by Chase and Bank of America and a couple other really large banks trying to shake hands and figure out how to do this. So the government wasn't coming in and regulating it. So it was private sector initiative. And they were quite successful for a while. Honestly, you know more about it than I do, so maybe you could share where it's gone. But it seems to me that ISACs, we haven't quite cracked the nut, in part because human nature, we're just worried. We don't want to share anything bad about ourselves. We want to just share the positive. That doesn't help. On the other hand, we want everyone else to share what the vulnerabilities are that they see, so that we can shore up ourselves. It's a prisoner's dilemma. It's a prisoner's dilemma project in real life.
It is. Thank you for your insights. I look forward to the session.
Thank you.
So, Keri, we have a couple more questions coming in from chat, and if anybody else has one, I encourage you to raise your hand, but let me just read this next one. In the presence of national state attack vectors, which is happening against any bilateral conflict between any nations, how can an SME stay in cyber resilience with minimum disturbance?
Yeah. So this raises two important issues: the nation state attacks and SMEs. So let me just kind of tease those apart. I think SMEs staying cyber resilient is an issue bigger, perhaps more broader, perhaps, than just national state attack discussion here. So we actually have a new researcher that joined us last summer, who's very interested in SME cybersecurity. And she's looking at it from the supply chain perspective. How can an SME be a good supply chain participant? But the SME problem is big. It's big in part because SME, small, medium enterprises, they don't have the resources that the large guys have. They don't have perhaps the insight, because they may have one person who's in charge of IT, much less one person just in charge of cyber within their organization. There are a number of resources available to SMEs today, and if that's where you're coming from, I would encourage you to check some of these out. One is our research project. But there's, I just heard actually at the World Economic Forum about an initiative called, I think it's called Open, I forget what it's called, but it's put on by Dragos. Dragos has brought in a person who was the former CISO of a very large enterprise, an operational technology security company. And she has brought forth this initiative with a number of resources for SMEs to help you figure out where your vulnerabilities are and how you can be more secure. So let me just say, I'm not doing justice to her project. So if that is of interest to you, take my email out of this and email me, and I'll connect you to them outside of this call. But the nation state problem is a bigger problem. If a nation state dropped a bomb on your building, the government would be right there to help respond in multiple ways, respond, recover, perhaps it's an act of war. But we aren't seeing that same kind of thing in the cyber world yet. And I'm not quite sure where it's going or how it's being addressed. But it is a problem. The FBI, the CIA, the Homeland Security, there are a number of 3-letter agencies in the United States. I'm sure there's the equivalent in other countries that are trying to tackle this problem. And I would say your best bet about the nation state, whether you're an SME or larger company, is to get to know your local FBI office. They have all sorts of resources, not only to tell you what vectors they're seeing, but what vectors they've stopped. So, you might see them start up again, and what resources are available to you from the public sector. If there was an act of war, a whole region would be disrupted. Somebody disrupts the Boston area, every company in the Boston area would be affected. But in a cyber attack, we may or may not be so lucky, where there would be a region that would be getting those resources, and therefore resources might not be channeled in the direction that's needed. So my advice, again, thinking from a resilience perspective, is don't wait until you have a cyber incident to get to know your local authorities. Get to know them today, tomorrow. Find out who they are, get to know them. Either they have a website that has information on it, or they're holding presentations, some virtual, some in person. Get to know them now, so that if, or perhaps when you have an incident, you already know who to go to from the public sector. I know in Boston, there's a very robust FBI office that we interact with, and many of the other universities and cyber people in the Boston area interact with. And they put out a newsletter regularly, and they hold seminars regularly. They're available to come in and help you think through some of your cyber resilience activities. So let me stop there.
All right, well, we're getting near the top of the hour. I have one more question from chat, and then we'll wrap this up. And the final question is, for new SEC rules, what kind of skill sets and expertise could be expected from the board of directors?
That's a loaded question. So I'd like to say what could be expected is somebody with enough cybersecurity background to be able to ask and understand the risk management questions. However, it's still unknown. I mean, the SEC ruling basically says that you have to have your board has to have expertise in cybersecurity. It doesn't spell out what that means. So that doesn't mean you have to put a CISO on your board. And in fact, that CISO might not be the right person, because the CISO might go directly to the technology questions. And as I've already mentioned, we want to talk about risk management, and we want to talk about resilience. So the kind of skill set and expertise that you could expect from your board is going to vary. But what I'm hoping what we see is at least a willingness to dive into cyber resilience and what that means for your company. And if you're the person that's addressing the board, you're going to have to train them on the kind of questions to ask you, and then have the answers ready to respond to those questions. If you're on a board and you're not the cyber person, then you want to start raising with your board what kind of expertise is lacking here, and where are we going to find it. And it might be a CISO, it might be a cybersecurity manager of some sort, or a business person who has cyber expertise. With all due respect to my colleagues, I don't think it's the CIO who retired 10 years ago who you now bring on the board because they understand technology. I don't think that person necessarily has the insight or the perspective just because they were a CISO. They have to have been a particular kind of CISO that understands business risk and cybersecurity risk, and can lead the discussions on resilience and on what are the risks and how are we managing them.
All right. Well, Keri, thanks for joining us. It is always a pleasure.
Thanks, Alan. I really enjoyed this. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to have follow-up discussions. I might take a day or two to respond, but I will respond. We also have spun up some executive education programs for non-cyber leaders at Sloan. You can check out the exec ed programs if you're interested in that. And of course, you're welcome to hang out and participate with CAMS if any of these topics are of interest to you. Thanks again.
Sounds good. And a couple of other messages for our audience. I do encourage you to join us on February 7th at 10 a.m. for a discussion with Stephanie Warner, who is the Principal Research Scientist and Executive Director of the MIT Center for Information Systems Research, otherwise known as CISR. And also, don't forget to register for the MIT Sloan CIO Symposium on May 15 and 16 of this year. And that's all we have for now. Bye for now. Bye-bye.